They say, money makes the world go round. But what if the money itself is an illusion? Every day, billions of people wake up, trade their time, their labor, their lives for green paper and digital numbers that claim to hold value. But behind that comforting illusion lies one of the greatest economic deceptions in human history. The story of how the US dollar, the symbol of global trust, quietly became the world's most powerful lie. It's a story that begins not in a bank, but in a war room, shaped by fear, greed, and a series of deliberate choices that turned debt into wealth and nations into customers of a financial empire. Today, we'll unravel how a currency backed by nothing became the backbone of everything, and why that foundation might be cracking beneath our feet. Part 1. Origins. The golden promise. To understand the lie, we first need to remember when money was real, or at least, when it was supposed to be. After World War II, the world was in ruins. Economies were shattered, currencies unstable, and trust gone. The United States, untouched by the devastation, emerged as the new global leader. At a secretive meeting in 1944, the Bretton Woods Conference, 44 nations agreed to a new system. The dollar would be as good as gold, and every other currency would be tied to it. At the time, it made sense. America held nearly two-thirds of the world's gold reserves. The dollar was strong, trusted, and stable. A $35 bill could, in theory, be exchanged for 1 ounce of pure gold. But here's the first twist. That promise, as good as gold, was already beginning to fade. Behind closed doors, U.S. policymakers knew they could issue more dollars than they had gold to back. After all, who would ever dare to call America's bluff? Part 2. The rise printing power. The 1950s and 60s became a golden era, not just for the U.S., but for the illusion it controlled. As dollars flooded the world, trade boomed. Nations held U.S. dollars in their reserves, believing they were holding a claim to American gold. But in reality, Washington had found a loophole in global economics. It could print wealth, and the rest of the world would accept it. This system, known as the dollar hegemony, created an invisible empire. Every international deal, every oil trade, every major transaction, flowed through the dollar. But there was a problem. The more the U.S. spent on wars, aid, and expansion, the more dollars left American soil. Foreign nations, especially France, began to notice something strange. The math didn't add up. In 1965, French President Charles de Gaulle made a bold move. He demanded to exchange his nation's dollars for real gold. Shipments of American gold began leaving Fort Knox. Confidence trembled. If others followed France's lead, the illusion would collapse. By 1971, the United States faced a critical choice: lose its gold or lose the game. Part 3. The breaking point. Nixon's lie. August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon appeared on television with calm authority. He announced what he called temporary measures to protect the U.S. dollar. But what he really did was historic and irreversible. With a single speech, Nixon ended the gold standard. The U.S. would no longer exchange dollars for gold. The promise was broken. The world's reserve currency was now backed by nothing. The temporary measure became permanent. The dollar became pure fiat currency, money that held value only because governments said it did. And yet, the collapse didn't come. Instead, something extraordinary happened. The world doubled down on the lie. Because even though the dollar was now an empty promise, it was still the only promise the global system trusted. Part 4. The aftermath. The petrodollar age. The 1970s could have ended the dollar's dominance. But instead, the United States found a new anchor, not gold, but oil. After the oil crisis of 1973, the U.S. struck a quiet deal with Saudi Arabia. The terms were simple but world-changing. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil only in U.S. dollars. In return, the U.S. would protect the kingdom militarily. Soon, every OPEC nation followed. Suddenly, if any country wanted to buy oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, they needed dollars. Thus was born the petrodollar system. This move transformed the dollar from a national currency into a global necessity. Nations began stockpiling U.S. Treasury bonds to secure their oil supplies. America could print money, and the world had no choice but to accept it. It was genius. And it was a trap. Because every printed dollar was a quiet export of inflation. The U.S. could live beyond its means, borrowing endlessly, while other nations absorbed the cost. The lie was no longer just about gold, it was about power and control. Part 5. The modern empire. Debt as wealth. Over the next decades, the illusion grew into a monster. The dollar became the center of a debt-based economy. Banks no longer lent what they had. They created money out of thin air through fractional reserve banking. Governments borrowed endlessly, corporations speculated recklessly, and consumers learned to live on credit. By 2008, the system began to crack. The global financial crisis exposed how fragile the entire structure was. Trillions vanished overnight, but rather than reform, central banks doubled down. They called it quantitative easing, a fancy term for printing even more money. The U.S. Federal Reserve created over $3 trillion out of nothing. Other central banks followed. Once again, the lie expanded, dressed in new language, hidden behind data, charts, and policy jargon. Today, the world's total debt has surpassed $300 trillion. Every dollar is borrowed into existence. Every note is someone else's liability. And every promise is built on the assumption that the music will never stop. But here's the truth. No empire built on debt has ever lasted forever. Part 6. The New Frontier: Digital Dollars and Control as Cracks Deepen. The next chapter of this story is already unfolding. Central banks are now preparing digital currencies, programmable money that can be tracked, controlled, and even expired. It's the next evolution of the dollar's illusion, turning it from paper control into digital domination. China's digital yuan and the push for CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, threaten to challenge the dollar's reign. Meanwhile, the U.S. faces record inflation, widening inequality, and the slow erosion of trust in its financial system. And yet, for now, the dollar still rules, not because it's stable, but because the alternatives are weaker. It's the cleanest shirt in a dirty laundry pile. But every empire's currency eventually meets its reckoning. The question isn't if, it's when. Part 7. The pattern repeats. Lessons from history if you look closely. History repeats like a haunting rhythm. The Roman denarius was once pure silver until emperors diluted it to fund their wars. Collapse followed. The British pound once ruled the world until endless debt and global wars drained its power. The US dollar followed the same pattern. Global dominance, unbacked expansion, rising inequality, and growing distrust. The pattern is always the same. Trust gives expansion, gives corruption, gives collapse. We're now deep in the corruption phase where money is no longer a measure of value, but a tool of manipulation. Ending takeaways plus warning plus call to action. So what can we learn from how the dollar became the world's most powerful lie? Takeaway 1. Value is not in the paper, it's in trust. Once that trust erodes, money becomes meaningless. Takeaway 2. Every financial system built on unlimited debt eventually implodes. The only question is how long the illusion can hold. Takeaway 3. The next system, whether digital or decentralized, will decide who truly controls the future of money. The dollar story isn't just about currency. It's about human psychology, our willingness to believe in symbols of stability, even as the ground shifts beneath us. Maybe the biggest lie wasn't that the dollar was ever backed by gold. Maybe the lie is that we ever thought money was real at all. If you found this story eye-opening, subscribe and share this video, because the next financial illusion might already be taking shape, and understanding the past could be the only way to see through what is coming next. How the dollar became the world's most powerful lie, because sometimes the truth costs more than money itself.